Pensioners and poorer families with children in London are bearing the brunt of a perfect storm created by the return of inflation, inadequate welfare benefits and sky-high costs for essentials such as childcare, according to a major new report. It reveals how more than a quarter of households in London get by on incomes that leave them unable not only to afford essentials such as a warm home but also unable to pay for items deemed important for social inclusion, such as eating out occasionally. Safety net benefits also fail to provide for Londoners' minimum needs, leaving those in inner boroughs facing a shortfall of £22.77 a week between housing benefit and their rent. Life is a struggle even for those working on the national living wage, a compulsory rate introduced last year under George Osborne's chancellorship. Few London households with someone earning the national living wage full-time were able to reach the income needed for a minimum standard of living, even though the wage rose by 4% in April. The research by the Trust for London Charity and Loughborough University's Centre for Research in Social Policy is based on detailed discussions with members of the public about goods and services needed to achieve a socially acceptable standard of living. It uses a minimum income standard, MIS, for 4 types of London households, compared with the rest of the UK. Some 39% of Londoners have an income below the MIS, against 30% in the UK as a whole. The proportion of Londoners falling below the standard has dropped slightly over the past 2 years, but 3.3 million are still on incomes below what is needed for a decent standard of living. Among its conclusions, likely to be seized on by those pressing for government action on housing benefits, public sector pay and housing, is that higher costs such as housing and childcare mean that reaching a minimum decent standard of living is between 16% and 53% more expensive in London than it is in the rest of the UK. The national living wage gives only half the income needed for a single working-age Londoner. One relatively overlooked group in an increasingly precarious position are pensioner couples in inner London. Over the past 7 years, the proportion unable to afford a decent standard of living has increased from 23% to 32%, a reversal in a long-running trend of improved living standards for this age group. Governments have suggested that pensioner poverty is largely a thing of the past, said Matt Padley, the report's author. But even with the triple lock on pensions and linking of increases to rises in earnings and inflation, incomes for pensioners in the city have not kept up with increasing prices on things like rail travel, and are becoming less and less adequate. It's really quite stark. Across all 4 types of households reported on, single people of working age, pensioner couples, lone parents with 1 child and couples with 2 children, the report found the cost of a minimum budget had risen since 2016 owing to the return of inflation after a prolonged period of price stability. While there has been a considerable focus in recent years on family flight from London because of factors such as housing costs, Padley said evidence for this was patchy.